Delana.
Okay, so I emailed you a few things. The first one was asking your opinion of what John Lutzkovich talked about, how nines and will mistype as fours and fives. And John did write those quite detailed articles on what he thinks is going on. So I sent that to you. So what I was asking was, what did you think of John's opinion?
One of the most important things I learned was the preponderance of nines, then sixes, then threes. And first I thought it was just typology, culture. But then when I was doing my research, I went to all walks of life, people that would never want to do anything with typology, but I kind of talked them into giving their perspectives. And so it was universal. And with one study years ago, was on what relationships work the best together. Most of the people were in relationship with a nine. And I thought, well, that's because nines are easygoing or trying to get along. But then it was just everything I did. There was such a large number of nines, and I was evaluating many cultures, not just Enneagram or typology. And then when I met Naranjo in 1996, I said, is it just me, or they're like mostly nines, then sixes, and then threes? And he said, oh, yes, they're the primary types. And I go, yeah, that's what I thought. But I said, it's like they mistype, but they're so common. But the nine will at least be willing to have the nine in the tritype, but the six often does not want it. And when they took my earlier test, they would try to work with the test to not be a six. So originally I had those cards. I don't know if any of you saw my first cards that were online, and I would do them like a Las Vegas dealer. I'd put them out and then they would choose one and I'd pick it up and put it away. And I did the type and tri-type. And if I was at an event like of 60 people, someone else that I was co-teaching with, and that was often David, would have a set of cards and another person a set, and to get through that number of people. But I went around and checked everyone. And there's a particular way that people will choose cards as a six, and I see the pattern. And so when I see it, I ask them a few questions, and I tell the people, well, this is like a particular process that the six uses when making their selections. And then I asked people that had six the questions that were needed, like why, not what you do. And that's why I always say it when we're together. I always say, but why? So you do this or you don't do this, but why? Which is far more indicative of type than what we do, because that's behavior. So we have to go a step beyond to what's underneath it. And they would always answer like the six. And I would say, well, you're the hard to identify six because you are disidentified with the structure in six. And the reason for that is so many of the archetypes of type six were lost in the dissemination of the Enneagram. They were just literally lost between trainings and early teachers. So the early authors didn't get all the archetypes of the six or the nine. So for example, the intellectual nine, like Echazo, was totally left out of the dissemination of the Enneagram. Other people, they're trying to make sense of, gosh, this person's like a nine, but they're really intellectual. But they have the defense of not knowing and not wanting to make a decision if they have to be separate from someone they don't want to be separate from. So it's just all pretty much unconscious. So he said, no, there are more nines than anything else. And I said, well, what percentage? And he said, he asked me what I found, but that he had found that at least 75% were nines, because you need more nines. In other words, people to go along to get along for a culture to work. And the rarest type was the eight, and then the four, and then the seven. So primary types, the 963, in that order, not 9, 3, 6. So the 9's the most common, the 6 is the most dutiful, and then the 3 is the initiator. So in terms of percentages, they make up the top 20%, 20 to 30%. It would vary with the groups I was in. And then in terms of tri-type, they almost always had 6 or 9 in their tri-type. And people that John was referring to that are 9s that type as 4s or 5s if they're intellectual, in my experience, were the 9, 4, 5, the 9, 4, 6, or the 9, 4, 7, with the most common type in typology being the 9, 6, 4, not the 9, 5, 4. But when I would run the surveys asking people their type to see that who is this person interested in typologies in the Enneagram, and what would always come out in all 24 studies is the 9, 5, 4. But when I looked at their answers, the adjectives they used and what they checked off and stacked in what order, they were actually 6s. But what I'm saying is they don't know that because they didn't get that chunk of information on the archetypes. So I agree with John that there are more 9s and 6s than the other types, and it's in a total stacking order of dominance. And then each one of us gets to all 9 types, but how quickly? It's just a matter of, do we get there immediately because we're a 3, 6, 9 and our wings mean that all 9 types are copied or included, so we get all the types right up front? Or is it indirectly through a series of tritype archetypes? And I think I should say this now too, is that we have one dominant tritype, but we also have 2 to 6 tritypes that we use every day, all day. But just like our dominant Enneagram type, we have a dominant tritype. And the people that have more tritypes will have 9 or 6 in them, because that means they immediately are connected to 2 wings off their own type. And we all have that. But the hexad types are always connected to one primary type. And it could be indirectly, or like in my case, as triple hexad, I'm not connected to a primary. I have to get there via a wing of a wing or a line of connection from one of the types. So that's why the 4, 7, 8 is the rarest, and the 3, 6, 9 is the most common. And then all the variable combinations show you the prominence.